Something that makes, to me, a good book, or a good movie, or a good game, so on and so forth, a good play, are memorable smaller characters. Not so much supporting roles, but I mean like just a small character in the film that you just remember. A few examples. I think of the father from a movie called Contagion, that he literally only has one scene, but yeah, I still remember the sequence where, you know, he exposes, her daughter comes up to him who's just found a cure for the contagion, but is practicing it out on herself, is testing it out on herself, and she exposes herself through the virus, through her father, because her father has contracted the virus. Another one, the wife from a movie called Network, directed by Sidney Lumet. She literally has like 3 minutes, 3 scenes in the film. And she won a well-deserved Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress in that film. She just does an absolutely phenomenal job and steals the show, and I'll always remember her, especially considering the fact that that movie is just full of good performances. The fact that I remember her, she doesn't get swallowed up, is just phenomenal. And this one's a little lesser known, but the little girl from Gods and Generals, she has only about 15 minutes of screen time in a 4.5 hour long movie. She, you know, helps save almost a lot of elements of General Stonewall Jackson in the film, and gives him a level of humanism that wasn't really there beforehand. One of my favorite examples of this, a smaller character that is utterly, absolutely, you know, memorable, is the captain from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The Union captain from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. He has about 10 minutes of screen time in this 3-hour film, and he absolutely steals the show in a movie full of great performances. He is basically the embodiment of an epic. One of the biggest things that you'll find in epics, and I do mean this, our main heroes are a part of a smaller picture compared to the universe that surrounds them. Let's look at Ben-Hur. Probably the most famous epic out there, arguably. Ben-Hur is a story about a man wanting to get, if you really look at it, a man trying to both salvage his own soul as well as get revenge, compared to, you know, the resurrection of the life of Jesus and, you know, the Roman Empire. Dr. Zhivago is about a man who falls in love with this woman, and they have a forbidden love with each other against the backdrop of the Russian Revolution. You know, that's just a couple of examples of an epic that has, you know, our main characters are part of something smaller compared to the universe that's around them. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is no exception. In this movie, it is, you know, the characters Tuco, Blondie, and Angel Eyes wanting to find gold against the backdrop of the hell that was the American Civil War. So we meet this captain when they're about to, you know, find the cemetery. We meet this captain because apparently there's a battle going on there. And this captain is piss drunk. Just utterly piss drunk. And, the makeup on him is great, too. Like, he looks like a man who's been out in the weather for a long time. And he's just great. But the actor who plays the captain, he was Italian, does an amazing job, especially with his eyes, just to show who he is and what he stands for. And the man who dubbed him, because, you know, in the West we have the dubbed version of the film, because he spoke Italian, they had to dub him in English because everybody else spoke English, is also phenomenal, because his voice is deep and even slightly intimidating, you know, contrasted with his drunken nature, so it's really well done. But Tuco says they are going to enlist and volunteer, basically as a way to save their hide and make sure that they don't get thrown in jail for trespassing onto the trenches of the Union line. The captain just then takes them on a tour of the trenches and says some horrible shit that would dissuade most people. My favorite line from the sequence where he does this is, whoever has the most booze to get their soldiers drunk and send them to be slaughtered is the winner. That's not exactly a way to rile up or, like, rally either your soldiers or some people that want to volunteer. Of course, the captain does not know that, you know, what Blondie and Tuco want is not to be part of this at all, and they just want the gold in the cemetery. It becomes clear that the captain is a flawed man who has just seen too much. The thing that, like, separates him from, you know, normal soldiers suffering from, PTSD in a movie, or you know, something along those lines, is that this captain clearly cares about his soldiers and hates the fact that he must take and defend this stupid bridge on what he calls a fly speck on some general's map. Because he does care for his men. To me, this shows that he's far more of a human being than what most movies made around this time would depict a captain. That, you know, he is a human being, that he's not some savior, which The Good, the Bad, the Ugly does an amazing job at doing, is showing you that nothing is as black and white as it seems to be. And Sergio Leone loved that, especially because he was sick of all these American westerns having a clear good guy, a clear bad guy. And Sergio Leone perfectly portrays that. You know, he's like, what the Union are doing is just as stupid as what the Confederates are doing. What Angel Eyes is doing is just as worse as, or is just as bad as what Blondie is doing. In fact, if you actually look at it, Blondie, who is supposed to be the good in this movie, Clint Eastwood, kills way more people than Angel Eyes ever does on screen in the film. Angel Eyes, Lee Van Cleef, only shoots 3 people, and one of them is in self-defense. Blondie kills way more people than that, and he's supposed to be the good. So again, that's where some of that muddy water comes in. And going back to the captain, he clearly cares for this man, and he says it's some fly speck on some general's map, the bridge. Therefore, he gets drunk to drown out his own personal emotions and even his own thoughts. It's a way to silence those demons that are telling him, get the fuck out of here, save your men. Or that's something that's trained in soldiers, is something along that line. And this captain has now been here for so long and has been seeing all these men just slaughtered on this bridge stupidly that he can't take it anymore. So he has to drown it out in booze just to keep maintaining that way of, I need to follow my orders. And he speaks about wanting to blow up the bridge. You know, he says it's a court-martial offense to even thinking about destroying that bridge. On top of him caring about his men, he's also terrified about what the brass would do to him if he was to blow up the bridge. Which they would court-martial him and they would execute him for being a coward. And he doesn't want to be a coward. The captain clearly does not want to be called a coward or be known as a coward, but that's exactly what would happen to him. And it's funny because as he really says that and really reveals what he wants, he says, I could save many thousands of men, but what I lack is the guts. And as he finishes that sentence, an explosion goes off, and the first one of the attacks of the day is about to begin, because according to him, there's 2 attacks a day. As, you know, the cannons start firing and, you know, explosions fall all around the captain, he just remains still. As you see Blondie and Tuco take cover in the trench, he just stands there, and he just said the line, what I lack is the guts. But yet he's being way braver than Tuco and Blondie. There's a brilliant irony there, and Sergio Leone, of course, directing this, was very aware of it. A part of me wonders why he is explaining all this to Tuco and Blondie. Why is he going up and down the trenches? He probably, anyone else just wouldn't care and just say, here's a gun, go. And it made sense to me once I finally was able to connect the dots that he just cared so much about his men. That he was actually being a very good captain. Or trying to be. He's going against his own moral codes here because he's a soldier and he was trained to follow orders no matter what. Which, of course, actually, if you really look at it, would be much more resonating in Europe, especially, because this was made 20 years after World War II, and a lot of people who fought in World War II, of course, were still alive. Especially Italy was just ravaged by war. I mean, the Nazis raped the Italians once Mussolini was deposed, and then the Americans came through, and, you know, you had the caves in Rome where the massacres took place, where Nazis just literally threw, which is actually very similar to this. There's a case in Rome where there were these caves that they just threw a bunch of people in, men, women, and children. They just threw these people in, and they had soldiers just shoot them, and they had to get the soldiers drunk in order to... Very similar to this, to what this captain is going through. He has no choice but to follow orders, and those soldiers, quite frankly, had no choice but to follow orders. I'm not defending them in any way. What they did was horrible, but I don't blame the soldiers as much as I blame the commanders who were heinous enough to order them to do this. That would be very prevalent in the minds of the audience watching this film. That isn't so much there today. Though that was more of a theme in Sergio Leone's, my favorite Sergio Leone film, Duck You Sucker, aka A Fistful of Dynamite. But it made sense to me that once he cared, once I realized that the captain really cared about his men, and that he's trying to push away he's trying to push away Tuco and Blondie from the war. That's all he's trying to do. It's funny because neither Tuco or Blondie really care about the war at all. They only want the gold. A very selfish thing. They only want the gold in that cemetery across that river where the bridge is. And I always found it kind of strange, but yet fitting, that it takes two people completely not attached to the war on any sides at all are the ones to actually blow up the bridge. And I find that very fitting and a thematic standpoint that Sergio Leone would certainly bring up later in his films. The captain is horribly wounded, and Blondie tells the captain to basically keep his eyes open. Keep your eyes on the bridge. And of course I love how the captain's like, Doc, keep me alive a bit longer. He knows what Blondie and Tuco are going to do because they've talked about it before and how they're new and they're not really attached. And I love that sequence there. There's just like an unspoken bond between him and Blondie specifically. Despite, him liking Tuco for downing that whole thing of liquor. Again, he only has like 10 minutes of screen time and there's all this shit packed in there. It's a great character. And as the bridge explodes, the captain watches in just pure ecstasy. Seeing that the thing that has caused so many of his men to die is now gone. He smiles, and just the joy in his eyes that are just barely open. And then he dies, and he knows that he just saved a lot of men on both sides of the battlefield. As that happens, you have Ennio Morricone's Civil War theme that also just fits perfectly, and this is the last time we hear it, it fits so perfectly as a finale for the captain. The captain is kind of the embodiment of the Civil War at the time, or at least in this universe. What I mean by the Civil War theme is that this music plays whenever there is a sequence of the Civil War. Whenever we see soldiers or what soldiers are doing involved in the Civil War, we hear this theme. And of course, the last time we hear it is on the shots of, the bridge exploding and the captain dying, which fits very well. And this time, Morricone adds this beautiful woman vocalist that swells as the captain passes away, almost like his soul is finally free, that he can now leave this bridge, that he doesn't need to worry about them anymore, and he knows that his men will be safe now because the bridge is gone, and it swells with him. And this stuff was all prevalent in the minds of, Sergio Leone, and Ennio Morricone, who they made their music before the movie was even shot. The music was one of the first things that, they would do. And oftentimes, Sergio Leone would actually play the music while the characters were acting, because if you're listening to music, you can actually almost feel differently. You can think differently of how you're presenting yourself, and I think it works. I look at, the greatest story ever told, some of the greatest performances I've ever seen in a movie, and oftentimes George Stevens in that movie played operatic music to, either to give off a certain emotion from his cast, and it would work, and it worked beautifully. I can't even say that, sometimes things are created by accident, don't get me wrong, but Sergio Leone was such a perfectionist when it came to, this often bugged Clint Eastwood, because Clint Eastwood is the opposite of a perfectionist. You look at him and he never does anything more than 3 takes, even when he's directing a film. He thinks that better performances come out of that. Well, Sergio Leone was kind of the opposite of that. Sergio Leone was like, no, it needs to be perfect. And he would, not like Stanley Kubrick at all, but he would do like 20 takes just to get this shot right. That's the kind of man he was. Or he'd rehearse it all day just to get, 2 shots done. He made masterpieces because of it. And so does Clint Eastwood, don't get me wrong. It's just 2 different styles of directing. But to go back to what I was saying at the beginning, good characters are the ones that we remember the most, no matter how big or small they are. And I've always said that a good movie is when a smaller character is just as prevalent as a huge character. You remember that smaller character just as much as you remember the bigger character. Look at Jack Hawkins from Ben-Hur. He's not in the movie very long at all. He's only in the movie for 20 to 30 minutes, and then he disappears in the film, even before the intermission, and I still remember him like mad. And The Captain from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is one of the finest examples of this. Of writing done well, of directing done well, of editing done well, of cinematography done well. It's just one of the finest, of acting done well. It's just one of the finest examples of this, and I can't praise that captain enough. the actor, and so on and so forth. And it was clear that Sergio Leone knew of this man's, the captain's, slight importance, that this was the man to embody this Civil War for this film. And he went with it, and of course, the captain, for me, to wrap this up, is truly one of the greatest characters ever put to film, and he's only got 10 minutes of film. Only 10 minutes of screen time, not even in the movie. That's just phenomenal. So in the end, go on Facebook, like AN Productions, for all up-to-date information of what we're doing there. Go on Facebook, like the Godzilla Saga for all up-to-date information on how those books are going. Hit the subscribe button. In the comments, tell me, maybe a character that has very little screen time, but you think was very good, and so on and so forth. Very similar to the captain here. Whatever you want. Or tell me I'm an idiot, like you guys tend to do anyways. So, in the end, this is Adam Nice of AN Productions saying, sayonara.